me now, Naveed Jamali, former FBI double agent and MSNBC contributor. Clint Watts, former FBI special agent, also an MSNBC contributor. Clint, I would imagine to someone like you, the revelation of the memos does not come as a surprise.
Not at all. I mean, you're talking about a meticulous lawyer throughout his career. He's been through this before with the Ashcroft stuff and, you know, let's sign this on your hospital bed. He knows how to prepare for these events. I'm sure every time he went in with President Trump, he came back, he wrote down some notes about it. The other thing I keep hearing is he should resign. I think this is nonsense. You don't resign every time one of these challenges comes up. Comey signed on to protect the Constitution and the people of the United States. He's on a 10-year term, and he's there to balance against these political pressures, whether it was the Clinton campaign connections last summer or it's the Trump administration now. And had, you know, Comey resigned, who was he going to be replaced by? Somebody who was definitely going to squelch these investigations. So I thought Comey did the right thing, documenting these things. The other part we look at with obstruction, there's impeding the investigation, there's influencing. It's two very separate things. The investigators, the agents on a day-to-day basis are going to keep moving with this. You don't have obstruction until you have destruction of evidence, not turning things over for subpoena, lying to investigators. That's obstruction of justice. It's going to be much easier to prove against the president. There's no evidence that he's done that to this point.
So you don't think this clears the bar?
I don't think it's
sort of legal sense in terms of what the actual U.S. criminal code spells out as obstruction.
I don't think it will clear the bar, and I think you're going to get into he said arguments back and forth. But I think this definitely shows influence. You've got a pattern of this, and the president admits to this influence. That's the craziest part about it. He brings Comey in, asks for a loyalty oath. He comes in again, asks for him to get rid of the Flynn investigation. He comes back after his press secretary, his people go out, say this is about competency over at the FBI, and says, no, it's not about competency, it's about the Russia investigation. It's a pattern that shows he's clearly trying to influence this away.
Well, and Naveed, I mean, you know, there's two tracks upon which one you can think about this. One is the obstruction, right, the sort of cover-up part of it, and then there's a sort of original sin here, to the extent there is one, which is Sally Yates calling Flynn's interactions with Kislyak problematic, the idea that she told them that he was compromised by the Russians, that they did nothing, that they only did something when it became public, that the day after he asked them to lay off Flynn. The Russia part of this seems inescapable every direction you turn in every story.
That's absolutely right. I mean, and this very well could be two parallel tracks here. I mean, just because there's a Russia involvement, and look, it's very possible that in the case of Flynn, he may have been recruited and had inappropriate contact or been directed by the Russians, but may not have been done so under the direction of Donald Trump. I think that doesn't have to necessarily be, to Clint's point, this intersection, this connection between these two tracks. I think what separates this and what gives this the real gravity is the fact that at a certain point, Donald Trump was officially made aware of the concerns by the Justice Department of General Flynn. And at that point, Donald Trump, you know, essentially refused to act on those concerns. Anyone else, if you have a security clearance, no matter how slight the concern, the derogatory information that's presented, your clearance will be removed, and you would be removed from that position. The fact that he's kept him 18 days is shocking.
Well, and I think that's important to put these two facts next to each other. One is the fact that it took 18 days. Sally Yates comes there. She comes twice. She makes this warning. It's a grave one. Nothing is done until it gets to the press. And then, as soon as something is done, the next day, the President of the United States asks the FBI director to let the guy off the hook. Right. Those two things sit next to each other.
They do. And let me clarify my comments on obstruction. I think where you're going to ultimately see it when it comes out, if there's obstruction, is you're going to see it with the intermediaries. We're seeing those, and we're documenting now those actions with Trump, how Trump interacted with Comey. But there are intermediaries between Trump, the Department of Justice, the White House staff, that were putting pressure on the FBI and the entire intelligence community. Let's reorient towards leaks. Let's not worry about the Russia investigation. If those points in the middle there can be seen where emissaries from the White House were going over to the FBI or the Department of Justice or coercing witnesses, for example, to speak one way or another, that's probably going to be the nails that need to be in the coffin to finish off the obstruction.
And as for General Flynn, Naveed, it strikes me that as much as people want to hear from Comey, and that makes sense, Flynn is going to be testifying at some point, although one imagines that he may be in a position to plead the fifth.
Absolutely, and the fact that he asked for immunity, I mean, it just raises so much questions. What is he willing to trade? I mean, where do these two paths connect? I mean, this has been the assertion from the beginning. Is there a connection between Russia and as Clinton, whether it's obstruction or whatever else it might be, is there a connection between those two? And I think that's where General Flynn could perhaps shed some light.
All right, Naveed Jamali and Clint Watts, thank you both, gentlemen.